and welcome to Legal Growth Podcast, where we dive into the strategies, challenges, and success stories shaping the future of law firms. I'm your host, Aaron Fulk, and together with Legal Growth Partners, we'll bring you in-depth conversations with top legal professionals, industry innovators, and firm leaders. Our goal is simple: share practical insights, innovative strategies, and real-world advice to help your law firm scale, adapt, and thrive. Whether you're navigating growth challenges or looking to boost your business development, you are in the right place. Let's dive in. This week, our guest is Bill Goldberg. Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm great, Aaron. How are you?
I'm really excited that you're on the podcast. I know you said you had a super busy day, so thank you for fitting us in. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
So give us a quick overview of how you chose law and the specialty of law that you practice.
So, when I was younger, I had always had an interest in law. And I myself had a little bit less traditional of a path to becoming an attorney, in part because by the time I had graduated undergrad, I was just so sick of being a broke college student that I just jumped right into the work world. Started out at a company called Ethos Consulting Group, doing sales and marketing optimization and consulting for businesses, small businesses, but also very large scale businesses. So we worked with clients like AT&T and Verizon, helping optimize their internal sales teams. Did that, well, take a step back. I did that for a little while and then ended up bouncing from there to a company called Epicor Software, where I worked for a number of years and then ultimately landed at VMware, doing project management and account management for a number of years in the tech sector prior to making my decision to go to law school. And so that actually was a very important experience in driving and kind of framing the foundation of how I practice law today, because I had that 6-7 year foundation actually working in the commercial sector. That gives me an insight and understanding into my clients' needs. That's very important today in the way that I practice law. So I decided to go to law school eventually because I wanted to do something that was a little bit more intellectually rigorous and challenging to push myself. I think there's a certain point when you're just managing people and making sure certain things get done and doing some sales work, it got a little boring. And so that's why I ended up going to law school. But I've always been very passionate about business, helping businesses succeed, and seeing people thrive in a way that I can contribute to that success.
Well, I love that. What was it like going later, like being a later in life student versus the first time you went?
So it was an interesting experience, right? Because, first off, when you start law school, like in your late 20s and graduate in your early 30s, you're older than everyone around you. But you also end up taking the experience a little more seriously, I think, than a lot of other folks do. And it makes it so that when I first started practicing, there was so much foundation already built and understanding what my clients' needs are, what they care about, that a lot of law students and young attorneys miss out on, right? Is that they think of things within the framework of, oh my gosh, let's get super technical and everything is framed within kind of an end all be all of the legalese and things. And what gets lost in that process is centering yourself in what matters for the client.
I love that. So what has been your biggest growth success story so far?
So the biggest growth success story I have, and it kind of goes back to a little bit more into the trajectory of my career. First job out of law school was kind of an extension of my externship in law school at a small local firm. But my first kind of big time job in legal practice was at Clark Hill, which is a big law firm. I was on the corporate team based out of Denver, and kind of without getting into kind of the bit of a trash talk of the big law field. After about 3.5 years, they scaled back the Denver office. Associates are relatively fungible, and I ended up getting laid off. And so I kind of had to have this moment where I was like, okay, what am I going to do moving forward? Well, what ended up happening through no planning of my own was that some folks who I'd done some really good work with and connections that I had built in my network reached out to me, and they And I said, hey, I'm no longer with Clark Hill. Their response was, well, can I just hire you directly then to do the work for me? And so that ended up turning into just under 3 years of solo practice that completely launched my legal career into kind of a completely different level. When you're running your own firm and you're the sole person who's responsible for delivering for your clients and solving problems and arriving at positive outcomes for those clients, you develop a sense of ownership of your work that I think is incredibly valuable. And so for me, that experience as a solo practitioner was unquestionably the biggest growth experience of my career.
Yeah, you learn a lot more when you're having to do all the things and wear all the hats, huh?
Yeah.
It stretches you for sure. So what is your favorite non-legal skill that surprisingly has been helpful while you've been on your law journey?
So I am a big time nerd. I kind of came out of the tech sector prior to law school, and I've always been very passionate and interested in technology. And so what I've found is that one of the biggest issues that most attorneys are experiencing currently in the legal space is the emergence of AI's integration into the legal space. And as a nerd myself who's been following the development of these LLMs and seeing how valuable and important they can be, but also I have a pretty solid understanding of the nuanced pitfalls and things you need to avoid with using these AI tools. A lot of that comes from the fact of my passion for technology and understanding how these tools work and how to optimize them in a way that delivers positive outcomes for my clients.
Well, you're just leading me into the next answer or the next question. And I already know your answer because everyone answers around the same thing on this, but it'll be really interesting take from you because of that experience. Looking ahead, what trends or changes do you see shaping the future of law? And how are you positioning yourself to stay ahead of those?
So, obviously AI, I think, is the obvious answer there. I use AI every day in my legal practice. I think it's very important. At Levin Ginsberg, we use the Lexis platform, the closed loop protege AI. And I think it's also very important to understand, as an attorney, the responsible ways in which you are required to use AI, right? You can't just go onto ChatGPT and start asking questions about clients' confidential information or using it inappropriately. And so internally at our firm, we have very tight controls over that and a very purposeful and intentional policy to make sure we're using the tools appropriately. But the biggest thing that I've found is that AI, it makes me so much more efficient and it makes me much better at my job. Particularly as a corporate transactional attorney, it's incredible, right? Is I can get a 50, 60 page document sent to me, and what used to take me days and days to get through parsing every single line, I can use the AI tool to make myself dramatically more efficient in understanding what this language says, and identifying specific areas that need further attention. But that said, AI in the tools of an attorney's hands who kind of knows what they're doing and knows how to prompt it and drive it correctly is very different than AI in the hands of a layperson trying to DIY their own legal work. And frankly, I think that as far as the future trajectory in the legal space, we're going to be seeing in the coming years, particularly for litigators, we are going to be seeing a cascade of issues flowing from DIY contracts that are poorly drafted by non-attorneys who don't necessarily understand everything they put in these agreements and how sloppy and messy the product that they are using is, right? And very, very often it's producing and leading to very undesirable and pretty harsh outcomes, right? So for example, one client of mine who, longtime client, great client, he hired a contractor to do some work on his behalf, right? Nothing big. It was like a $15,000, $20,000 engagement. About halfway through the project, my client was unhappy, unsatisfied with the quality of the work that the contractor was performing, and he terminated the contractor. Well, the agreement had been drafted by that contractor. It was his agreement that he produced, and he very obviously used ChatGPT to produce it. Didn't consult an attorney, didn't talk to anybody with legal expertise who could advise him on the appropriate way to actually drive the AI. And what he ended up doing is including in that contract a mandatory arbitration clause that he didn't entirely understand. So he filed a claim in the Illinois court to sue for damages arising from the breach of contract. Getting that case dismissed took me 20 minutes of work, right?
Yeah.
and because there was a mandatory arbitration requirement. And what he hadn't thought through, because he didn't consult an attorney, was that the costs of going to arbitration and litigating the case through an arbitrator would exceed the damages that he would collect, right? And so he was basically SOL. And I tell that story because it's a cautionary tale about not just the benefits of AI and the ways in which it can make things easier for attorneys and non-attorneys to navigate the legal world, especially in the transactional space, but that if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have the knowledge, right, you're using tools to develop legal instruments that you don't have any nuanced understanding of, well, you end up like this gentleman who, he kind of got screwed.
Yeah. You're the first person that has brought up the opposite of what can happen, and how a lot of attorneys are going to have a lot more work because they're going to have to be hired against the contracts that were written up. So that's a really interesting point. I had never thought about that.
Yeah. And I see it every day, right? Is that, client wants to do a deal with someone. They were given an initial draft contract. I get it. I can open it up and immediately tell, okay, this is straight out of ChatGPT, right? And it's filled with contradictory terms. Very often you'll have, if you have like a package of agreements, right? Like concurrent contracts that are being executed all at the same time, but considered a part of one transaction, they might have different definitions. They might have different, I even saw one just yesterday where they had different venues, right? And it's like, okay, how can we square that where, one component of the contract says any future claim must be filed in the state of Illinois. And then in the same package, there's a venue clause of a different agreement that would be integrated that says Delaware venue only, right? And so these types of things, I think, are a lot of people need to pay attention to. And like I mentioned earlier, I think there's going to be an enormous cascade of problems in the coming years that are arising from these poorly drafted AI-generated contracts.
Fascinating. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for joining us on the Legal Growth Podcast presented by Legal Growth Partners. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe, drop us a review, and share it with your colleagues, because great insights are even better when shared. For more tips and tools to help grow your practice, visit LegalGrowthPartners.com. Until next time, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep smiling. And thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you.